Hello, loves. Today I have compiled quite a few good stories. Let's get started. Story 1: Firehouse First Horror Story. In the desolate wilderness of northern Alaska, an old firehouse stood abandoned, its once vibrant facade now crumbling and overgrown. Locals whispered tales of hauntings, stories of eerie cries echoing through the desolate halls and sightings of a sinister figure lurking in the shadows. As a family road trip wound its way through the remote region, a seemingly crazed man stumbled into their path. His eyes were wild, his voice hoarse with fear. He warned them of the horrors that dwelled within the abandoned firehouse, of creatures that roamed the surrounding forest. Unfazed, the family dismissed the man's ramblings as the delusions of a madman. The father, determined to prove him wrong, ventured towards the abandoned building. As he approached, the air grew thick with a sense of dread. The firehouse loomed like a cursed monolith, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. Ignoring the ominous signs, he cautiously stepped inside. Darkness enveloped him as he explored the desolate interior. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the empty halls, amplifying their own fear. Suddenly, a faint glow illuminated the far corner of the room. Drawing closer, they beheld a horrifying sight. A grotesque, shadowy figure emerged from the shadows, its form contorted and twisted. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly glow, and its long, sharp claws scraped against the floor. The father gasped in terror as the figure slowly turned towards them. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. A guttural growl escaped its throat, sending shivers down their spines. Frozen in place, he watched in horror as the figure advanced towards him, its eyes fixed on his neck. In that moment, they realized the truth in the madman's words. The abandoned firehouse was not haunted by mere ghosts, but by something far more sinister. As the figure drew closer, its form shimmered and transformed. It became a grotesque caricature of a woman, her body draped in a tattered wedding dress. Her eyes were filled with an ancient rage, and her mouth twisted into a cruel smile. The Pock Lady, as the locals called her, was the mistress of the forest's demons. With a flick of her wrist, she summoned a horde of creatures that lunged at the father. Amidst the chaos and terror, the family fled the cursed firehouse, their screams echoing through the desolate wilderness. As he stumbled back to their car, they could hear the laughter of the Pock Lady echoing behind them. The sound of her cruel mirth haunted their nightmares for years to come, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked in the shadows of the abandoned firehouse. Story 2: First Horror Story. Hope you like it. Set in the sun-setting town Salem, Ally, a curious toddler is hanging out with the friendly neighbors in the cozy, warmly lit kitchen. The aroma of freshly baked cookies fills the air, adding to the pleasant ambience. However, something feels slightly off, creating a subtle unease that lingers in the background. Alexis, Ally's mom, with her gentle smile, goes outside for a breath of fresh air and takes a leisurely stroll in the yard. As we all get distracted by the laughter and chatter, Alexis remains in the yard, and suddenly, an eerie feeling creeps over me, making me open a window and call her name. To my surprise, a distant, unfamiliar voice from the neighbor's house starts yelling Alexis's name, jolting us with its volume and urgency. It echoes through the tranquil evening, sending shivers down our spines. Alexis eventually returns inside, but her behavior becomes oddly robotic and distant, almost as if she's in a trance. As darkness falls, the town's atmosphere becomes mysterious and intriguing. The warm hues of the setting sun give way to the cooler, darker tones of dusk. The air carries a gentle, cool breeze that rustles the leaves on the trees, creating a soothing melody. The distant sounds of crickets and frogs serenade us, their rhythmic calls adding to the tranquility. I notice a faint, mysterious glow surrounding Alexis in the yard, casting an otherworldly aura around her small form. Her movements appear ethereal and disconnected from reality, further adding to the unsettling scene. The situation becomes more mysterious and alarming as the darkness envelopes the town. Eerie sounds echo in the distance, and multiple voices call out Alexis's name, making us all fear something supernatural might be at play. The calls are a strange mixture of echoes and reverberations, creating an almost haunting effect that lingers in the air. Despite our fear, we decide to stick together and confront the unknown. Inside the house, strange occurrences intensify, with flickering lights casting dancing shadows on the walls, adding to the unease. The mysteriously turned-on TV displays distorted images and symbols, accompanied by an unsettling, static noise. We attempt a protective ritual to help Alexis, our voices rising and falling in a harmonic rhythm, but the tension in the house rises with every chant. The sound of our collective breaths becomes synchronized, matching the beating of our hearts, both resolute and apprehensive. As the ritual reaches its peak, the room trembles, and the candle's gentle flickering intensifies, casting a mesmerizing glow that illuminates the room with a soft, warm light. The scent of the candle's wax mingles with the lingering aroma of cookies, creating a unique and surreal olfactory experience. We face a palpable sense of danger, but as suddenly as it began, everything stops. The room falls into silence, broken only by our heavy breathing. The glow around Alexis disappears like a fading dream, leaving us in awe and wonder. With relief, we see her come back to her senses, unaware of what just transpired. Her eyes, previously distant and glazed, now sparkle with innocence and curiosity, as if nothing unusual happened. From that unsettling night onwards, our bond as neighbors grows stronger, as we remain vigilant in protecting each other from the mysterious forces that may lurk in the shadows of Salem. The town's secrets continue to puzzle us, and we now keep a watchful eye on the setting sun, knowing that darkness can awaken strange occurrences. Story 3: Ghost in the Bedroom. It was a small, unsuspecting bedroom, decorated with soft purple walls, white trim, and a built-in with drawers on either side. The full-sized bed sat high in the center of the room, perpendicular to a small crowded closet and a single window, with just enough space to walk around. The room was nestled on the corner of a second-story brick house, the window overlooking a gentle rolling hill carved into two by a two-lane road. Behind the house, within 50 feet of the sloped, uneven backyard, lay a dense forest that stretched on for miles. Inside this small room, I found refuge. I was a typical teenager, rebellious, moody, and given frequent conflict with my family. I preferred to be alone. Each night, I would retreat into my room, shut the lights, and dial into my laptop. The laptop was merely a vessel for a hobby that I was indulging in. Inspired by a film class, I began watching all kinds of movies, both old and new, from the comfort and solitude of my bed. In that dark room, the world seemed to melt away as the screen danced with images of other worlds. Their stories distracted me from the chaos and emotion that simmered inside of me. Weeks passed and a routine began to take hold. Many times, after leaving the room for a bathroom break or a quest for the perfect snack, I'd discover my cat, Emmy, must have snuck in behind me. She was a short-haired black cat, impossible to see in the dark behind the screen, but I could feel her jump onto the bed and settle into the corner. One particular night, I retired early, and it was not long into my second film before I felt the familiar weight at the edge of the bed. Smiling, I shifted myself to give her room and nestled back into the sheets, but was abruptly startled by my door whipping open. My mom stared into the room, looking visibly confused. "Did you just walk into your room?" she asked me. "No." I responded hesitantly, "I've been in here for a couple hours." She took several paces into the room, looking around the edges of the bed, and pressed again, Do you have a friend over? No, it's just me and Emmy in here. Why? What's wrong? She turned on the light, and I sat up and looked down at my bed to see a large indent, still creased from the weight of her, was empty. I looked to both sides of the room, but she isn't there. Puzzled, I look back at my mom to see a fearful look in her eyes. I watched a girl walk into your room. I saw her in the hallway. Are you sure it wasn't you? No one is in here? I'm sure, I answer her. Fear began bubbling up deep inside of me, but I swallow hard to try to force it back down. Okay. Never mind, then, my mom says dejectedly and closes the door as swiftly as she opened it. Stunned, I sat quietly in the darkness, illuminated solely by the dim light of my computer. The energy of the room seemed to have shifted. It no longer felt comfortable and safe. I felt scared. Who could she have seen, I wondered? Was it real, or a trick of the eye? And where did Emmy go? My stomach twisted with anxiety, unsure of what to believe. I took a deep breath and pressed play on the laptop. This will help keep my mind off things, I thought to myself. 10. Maybe 20 minutes go by and I feel the familiar weight press into the edge of the bed. Pausing the movie, I sit up and whisper, "There you are," as I begin reaching for her. My hands pat around the blanket, but I don't feel her. I climb out of the bed to turn on the light when I suddenly realize that my door is closed. She couldn't have gotten in. Eyes wide, I dart to the light and switch it on to find the indent slowly leaving the bed. Emmy isn't in the room. Chills seem to dance across my skin, giving rise to a sea of goosebumps as the realization seeped in. In an instant, I shut the lights back out. Diving back into bed, I slammed my laptop shut and pulled the sheets over my head. I squeezed my eyes shut as I heard my bed creak under the weight of it. Turning my back to the edge, I willed myself to sleep. It can't hurt me if I don't give it the energy, I told myself. My blood ran cold as I felt a hand on my shoulder, tugging me, beckoning me to look at it. The grip seemed to grow stronger, and from the corner of my eye, a dark figure towered over the bed. I whispered over and over for hours for it to leave, that it was not welcome. I whispered until exhaustion won the war versus fear, and the world went still. It was the last night I ever stayed in that small, purple room. Story 4, Gray Face. Tick, 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 the sound of the clock ticking ran through the detention room. The room was dead silent, only filled with one other student and myself. The other student was sitting on the other side of the room, not paying any attention to me or their surroundings. I would take a nap to save myself from this purgatory, but the constant ticking of the clock ran through my brain like an alarm clock. Tick, tick, tick. I considered making conversation with the other student, but they didn't seem like much for conversation. They seemed around my age, 16 or 17, their short brown hair sat on their shoulders. The way they dressed and presented themselves made them look like your average innocent girl, but then we made eye contact. Her eyes were light blue, but they might as well have been scarlet red. They had a sort of fierceness in them that would make anyone shiver. I could feel her judgment crawl down my spine. I quickly turned away, not wanting to poke the beast anymore. I started to think about how I ended up here. I don't even remember, in all honesty, everything is kind of a blur. I know it was in the hallway, everything was normal, and then it was all red. I remember the rage, the hatred, and anger flowing through my body, any humanity in me drained away as I became a savage husk of anger. I think I hurt someone, but I can't remember. I don't think I want to. Finally, the teacher walked in to save me from myself. He was a tall man with a stern face. You could tell he's been dealing with troublemakers for a while, and he wasn't going to crack. His voice was deep and imposing. "You know why you are here," he said. "You're here because the school needs to punish you while they figure out if you're worth expelling or not." Expelled? I thought to myself. What had I done that set me up for expulsion? I could feel the memory trying to escape but was unable to reach the surface. The teacher once again spoke. "You'll be here for a few hours. Exits are magnetically locked with the main office being able to unlock them once your time is up. Your phones are in the office as well. You'll receive them once detention is over." The student next to me raised her hand. "Yes, Laura?" said the teacher, obviously annoyed. "How long do we have to do this for?" said the girl, presumably named Laura. "You both will be here until the school expels you or lets you off," said the teacher. However, for some people, the teacher looked over at me. Expulsion is more likely. I lowered my head in shame. I don't even know what I did, and here I am being reprimanded for it. It happened this morning, only a few hours ago, so why can't I remember? Whatever I did wrong, it's going to cost me a lot. First I had to wait after school until 6, and now I have detention until 9. Now I'm being told I could be expelled. I raised my head once I felt that the teacher's disappointing glaze had left. "So make yourself comfortable," said the teacher. "I'm going to be right back. I need to grab something from my car. Once I'm back, it's going to be 3 hours of silence." The teacher walked out and closed the door behind him. The second the door closed, the girl next to me laid back in her chair. After a few minutes of silence, she finally turned to me. "What did you do?" she said. "Huh?" I responded. "What did you do? What did you do to get here?" I turned to her, her fierce eyes piercing through my soul. I don't know," I responded meekly. "You don't know? What do you mean you don't know?" She sounded annoyed, like my answer offended her somehow. I heard a rumor about you," she said. "I heard they are holding you here because they are waiting for the police to figure out what to do." I looked at her, hoping to see that she was joking, but the intensity in her eyes said otherwise. "I also heard about what you did." Her eyes turned from fierce to straight-up hatred. "And if it's true, you're lucky I don't bash your head against a wall for what you did." With this comment, I stood up. "I'm going to find the teacher," I said. "The teacher won't save you from responsibility," said Laura. I turned away from her and began to exit the room when she let out one more remark. "You know, it's ironic, you didn't want to lose your friends to her. Yet you lost them anyway." I closed the door behind me. I felt sickened. Those weren't just empty threats. Those were real. I began walking towards the entrance of the school, letting what Laura said sink in. I didn't want to lose my friends to her? Who was her? Suddenly a memory unlocked, my brain finally allowing me to slightly remember what it was forcing me to forget. Bethany, her name was Bethany. Bethany is a new girl at our school, and she is perfect. Super nice, super smart, and the sweetest little thing. She had recently integrated into my little friend group. Everyone in the group basically showered her in attention, but that wasn't a problem for me. She's just a new part of the gang, and I don't have anything against her. I wouldn't hurt Bethany, she's my friend. I wouldn't. All these thoughts stopped once I reached the entrance. The front entrance was in ruins. The ceiling had been torn down with rubble, blocking the entrance entirely. There was no way to access it, and even if you could squeeze through, you would risk the whole mess collapsing on you. And then there was the body. My teacher was lying on the floor. His body was mangled to the point you could barely recognize him. His face was practically torn off. His blood and entrails spread across the floor and walls. The smell hit the hardest. It was the most disgusting thing I had ever smelled in my entire life. I stood there for a while, not knowing what to do. How did this happen? Who had done this? Then I heard the stomping. I began to run back to the classroom as the stomping behind me only got louder. I didn't know if it was behind me or not, but I didn't want to find out. Whatever was there let out an unholy noise. It sounded like it was screeching while inhaling. The noise pierced my skull as I continued to run in horror. I reached the detention classroom and ran inside, closing the door behind me. The room was empty. Laura was nowhere to be seen. Whatever got the teacher must have gotten her too. But what was it? The thumps got louder and louder, with the screeching continuing at random intervals. Suddenly the shadow of the creature passed by the window of the classroom. I couldn't see much of it, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't human. I waited for what seemed like an eternity until I felt as though the monster was gone. I opened the door slowly and peered out. The hallway was no longer lit up. The lights were completely smashed. All I could make out was the outlines of the classroom doors and lockers. I took a deep breath and stepped out, trying to be as silent as possible. My best move was to get to the office. The controls for the magnetic locks were in there, and so was my phone. I could call for help and unlock the magnetic doors, letting me leave. Plus, the office faculty may still be in there and could be oblivious to the monster roaming around. The least I could do is try to warn them. I started to make my way through the hallway, trying not to make a sound. I was on the first floor and I knew the office was on the second. I just had to make it up the stairs without running into that thing again. I made my way through the halls quietly and paranoid. I had never felt so much fear in my entire life. Each second felt hours long, and I knew I could easily be found at any moment. I felt alone. Everyone I trusted wasn't with me anymore. All my friends were busy with their own lives, so I was left to face the darkness alone. I felt like I had no one by my side. No one to trust. No one to lean on. I was all on my own. But yet they all paid attention to Bethany. They all talked to Bethany. They all hung out with Bethany. Why were my friends there for her? Why weren't they there for me? I suddenly snapped out of my trance. What were those feelings? Why am I thinking about Bethany and my friends right now? They have nothing to do with this. I felt alone at the moment, as I was locked in a school with a monster, but that was something different. That was a memory. That's how I felt. What had I done? Before I could remember anything else, I saw it. It was staring in front of me at the other end of the hall. It was at least 3 times my height. It had a large skull-like face. Its arms were long and its hands were huge, each with incredibly long and skinny fingers. Its legs were large as well, with backward knees and large deformed feet. His entire body was malnourished, with his skin tight around his bones. You could see its rib cage and you could see it breathing. Its eyes and mouths were hollow, with only a faint red light in its eyes. We stared at each other for what seemed like hours, both equally fascinated in the other. It then started to raise its hand. It slowly extended its arm and finger, pointing at me with no expression on its face. Then it let out a screech. And then it started to move. I ran in the opposite direction of the hallway, trying to reach the other staircase behind me. I could hear the creature screeching and stomping forward. I turned around at one point to see it. Its hands were in front of it like a T-Rex, and it was stomping forward at incredible speed. Adrenaline rushed through my body as I pushed myself to reach the staircase. I ran up the stairs as the creature continued to howl behind me. I reached the second floor with the office in reach. Suddenly a hand grabbed me and pulled me into a classroom. I tried to scream, but a hand covered my mouth. It was Laura. She motioned me to be quiet by putting her finger on her lip. Outside we heard the monster pass, still letting out its horrific screeches. Once the noises had faded, Laura removed her hand from my mouth and began to talk. "You're lucky I even saved you after what you did," said Laura. "I don't know what you're talking about," I responded. "I didn't do anything to Bethany, I didn't hurt her." Laura turned to me with an angry look in her eyes. "Funny you should say that," she said intensely, "because I never mentioned Bethany." My eyes widened as I realized my slip up. "You know what you did," said Laura. "You just don't want to remember." With that, something snapped within me. "Shut up!" I screamed as I knocked Laura to the ground. She stood up and punched me in the jaw, knocking me to the floor. "Admit to what you did," she screamed, hitting me again as I lay on the floor. "Admit it. You know what you did, admit it." Suddenly the hand of the creature burst through the classroom door. Both of us jumped back in fear. The creature held its horrific screech as it clawed its way through the door and into the classroom. It stood tall, still letting out its hollow screech. Laura was quick to act, picking up a nearby textbook and charging at the monster. She swung the textbook at the creature and hit it square in the jaw. The creature stumbled back and crashed into the wall, letting out a screech of pain. Laura ran back to me and grabbed my arm, pulling me up. Just as we were about to leave the classroom, however, the creature's hand launched forward and grabbed Laura. She screamed in fear as the creature tried to pull her away. I grabbed on to Laura's arm, refusing to let her go. The creature, however, was stronger and grabbed Laura with its other hand. With Laura screaming in fear and pain, I watched as her arm slowly began to tear, before coming off completely in my hands. The blood poured out of what was once her arm, drenching the classroom in the dark red liquid. I watched in horror as the creature lifted Laura into the air, grabbing Laura's head with one hand and her feet with the other. Then, as Laura screamed in pain and absolute terror, I watched as the creature began to pull. I could hear the bones cracking, I could hear the skin ripping, all while Laura screams in agony. Finally the tension gave in and the creature with a loud howl ripped Laura in half. Her intestines sprawled out as blood and entrails began to cover the floor. Her upper half laid lifeless in the creature's hands, her expression still locked in a terrified scream. The creature, body in hand, let out a terrifying screech, and as I began to run out of the classroom and towards the office, I reached the office with the monster still screeching in the distance. I opened the door to find what I expected. The faculty were all mangled, with blood coating the walls. I ran behind the desk and first unlocked the magnetic doors. I then opened up the desk and grabbed my phone. I called 911 as I could hear the screeching getting louder. After what felt like an eternity, the line picked up. "Hello 911, what's your emergency?" "Hello," I yelled. "I need help, there's a dash shot." The monster's hands burst through the ceiling above me, causing me to drop my phone as I scream in terror. I ran out of the room without even thinking. I could worry about the police later, the doors were unlocked. I had to leave. I ran through the hallway as the monster attempted to claw its way through the ceiling in the office. I was going to make it. I was going to make it. And then I saw her locker. Bethany. Bethany's locker. I tried to avoid looking at it, but I couldn't. What Laura said rang through my head. "You know what you did, you just don't want to remember." I tried to push the memory away. This wasn't the time. This wasn't the place. I looked at the locker again as I heard the monster screaming in the distance. "I don't care anymore. I don't care if it hurts. I don't care if I die. I don't want to forget anymore. I want to remember. I remember the morning. I remember feeling alone. All of my friends were busy with their own lives, leaving me to face my darkness alone. I was sad, I was alone, I was scared. And then I saw her. Bethany. Talking with my friends as always. I remember the jealousy. Why did they only care about her? Why were they always there for her? Why were they never there for me? I remember the rage. I remember the darkness and fear inside me taking over. I remember the happiness on her face when she saw me. I remember when that happiness turned into fear. I remember the blood as I smashed her head against the locker repeatedly. I remember the fear on my friend's face. I remember them trying to hold me back as I stomped her head in with my feet. I remember her barely breathing. I remember the ambulance taking her away. I remember being placed in the detention room until the police and faculty could figure out what to do. I remember the fear of losing my friends to her. I remember the jealousy of not being happy like her. I remember my hatred for her. I hated her. I hurt her. I almost killed her. With that memory, I stopped where I stood. I fell to my knees in tears. What had I done? I had let my jealousy, my fear of loneliness take over, and where had that gotten me? I was all alone now. No friends. No future. No hope. I could hear the monster behind me now, but I don't care. I don't deserve to live for what I've done. I deserve to die. The monster grabbed my shoulders and turned me around as it lifted me up. I stared at his hollow red eyes as tears flowed down my face. I'm sorry, Bethany. I'm sorry, everyone. I deserve this. The monster's eyes began to glow a brilliant orange. His mouth soon followed, filling with that bright brilliant light as he let out his howl. I stared at the lights, mesmerized by their brilliance. Then it went black. I woke up in a room with my hands tied to a hook on the ceiling. It seemed to be a boiler room. If it was the boiler room of the school or some other building, I did not know. The room was small, only containing a boiler and a drain on the floor. The drain was stuffed with what looked like flesh and feces. The walls around me are old and disgusting. The wallpaper peels in multiple areas. The room smelled horrible, the smell coming from the feces and rotting flesh in the drain. I looked around and saw other hooks with rotting bodies with their hands tied just like me. Suddenly in a corner, I saw it. The creature. It noticed me and slowly made its way over. I tried to move as it approached, but it was no use. The creature walked over to me and stood in front of me. I could feel its breath hitting my face. I wasn't scared to die. I wanted to die. Why hadn't it killed me? Finally, I found the courage to speak. What do you want? The creature stared at me before extending its hand and caressing my face with its long fingers. Then it spoke, and its answer was more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. Friends. Story 5, Horror of the Mundane. It was a bank, the same bank, the unchanging bank that I always walk to do my job as a teller. I've trudged to this bank every day now for about 5 years, copying my footsteps which are ingrained into the muddy pathway. I took one step out of line, making a new footprint, a little painting of rebellion. I hated this morning, just like most of the rest. Rows of annoyed people trying to be done talking to me as fast as possible so they can get out of this building that none of us wanted to be in. I can never remember the person, but I recall clearly the same few expressions they bear. Barely suppressed annoyance, subtle hints of desperation, sunken eyes made containers for financial despair. All of these emotions resonated with me, as I experienced them myself, but it never brought me any closer to the clientele. Rather, our shared negativity made the bulletproof glass at the counter seem ever thicker. It was boring, actually no, it was agonizing. The constant repetitive work would have been made decently pleasant if I had access to audiobooks, or some form of a means to entertainment, but the constant interaction with people rendered me unable to dull the already indistinct. I just wanted something to end, to signify that one day was different from another. I didn't want to work at the bank. I could work in other boxes, but the excitement of novel packaging would be quickly overridden by routine and the consequences of a lower wage. Mr. Teller, can you see me? A client squawked at me. I recoiled, snapping out of my daydreaming. Sorry, didn't get much sleep last night, how can I help you? I responded in my rehearsed customer service voice. The client looked displeased with his wrinkles on his forehead, scrunched up in what resembled a contour map of a valley range. But there was something different about his demeanor. His eyes kept on darting around, not being able to focus on anything. His frown wasn't the usual frown brought on by the frustration of a forced hand, but the annoyance brought on by the anxiety of a looming threat. Like how you feel when a group member suggests something stupid the day before the exam project was due. The man clutched a piece of paper which he passed through the 10mm portal in the glass panel while saying, "Read this." The paper was crinkled with writing on it which wasn't handwritten but glued on by taking pieces from newspapers. It said, "I have bomb, so give me 10,000. I was stunned. This idiot in front of me thought he could threaten me with an obviously fake bomb threat and a shabby letter? I nearly laughed. I had been trained once on what to do in these situations: press the emergency button and distract the criminal until police arrive, which would take a surprisingly short amount of time since they were stationed just up the street. So I pressed the button, but since I was so surprised and humored by this unusual situation, I made it quite obvious that I was pressing a button. I thought it didn't matter, but the criminal decided to prove me otherwise and convince me of the sincerity of his threat. So he threw a pouch from the bag he was holding into a queue the aisle over. The throw was followed by an exhilarating bang, and a small splatter of fresh red blood on the glass in front of me. Through the ringing of my ears and the shock on my eyes, I saw and heard people start running from the corpse-laden epicenter of new experience in my life. The fear I felt was to die for. People on TV describe events such as these with words like traumatic and horrible, and I'm sure it was for them, but this moment, for me, was my most reaffirming. Naturally, I quit working the bank the week after the event. I got a compensation package, but more importantly, I got on the news with an interview. I felt really guilty for not taking the threat seriously, but I was told that the guy was suicidal and would have detonated the bomb no matter what I did. In the end, days like that day ground my existence. After all, there is nothing like a tombstone to mark the remains of a stagnant story. Story 6: Horror Stories. Once upon a time, in a small town shrouded by misty woods, lived two young friends named Gabby and Jake. They were known for their daring adventures and insatiable curiosity. One fateful evening, they stumbled upon an ancient diary hidden in the attic of an abandoned house. Intrigued by the mysterious journal, Gabby and Jake began to read its haunting contents. The diary told a chilling tale of a malevolent spirit that had terrorized the town years ago. The spirit was said to possess its victims, driving them to commit unspeakable acts of violence before claiming their lives. Unnerved but fascinated, Gabby and Jake decided to investigate further. They embarked on a journey to uncover the truth behind the chilling legend. Armed with a flashlight and their unwavering determination, they delved deep into the heart of the woods, where the spirit was rumored to dwell. As they ventured deeper into the darkness, strange things began to happen. Shadows danced eerily between the gnarled trees, and whispers echoed through the still night air. Unseen hands brushed against their skin, and an icy coldness set shivers down their spines. The forest seemed to come alive, breathing with a malevolent energy. Gabby and Jake pressed on, their hearts pounding in their chests. They stumbled upon an old cemetery, overgrown and forgotten. Tombstones stood in solemn silence, bearing the names of those who had fallen victim to the vengeful spirit. The air was thick with an otherworldly presence, and the young friends realized they had awakened something dark and vengeful. Suddenly, a bone-chilling shriek pierced the silence, causing Gabby and Jake to freeze in terror. They turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a gaunt, twisted apparition with eyes that burned like hellfire. It was the vengeful spirit, hungry for their souls. With every step, the spirit grew stronger, its presence suffocating. Gabby and Jake tried to flee, but their legs felt heavy, as if shackled by invisible chains. Panic consumed them as they realized they were trapped in the clutches of an ancient evil. The spirit lunged at them, its grip tightening around their hearts. In a desperate act of survival, Gabby and Jake reached into their backpack and pulled out a small vial containing a blessed liquid. They had researched ancient rituals and discovered that the spirit could be banished with this sacred elixir. With trembling hands, they splashed the liquid onto the specter, releasing a blinding light that engulfed the forest. The spirit let out an agonizing scream, dissolving into nothingness. The darkness lifted, and tranquility settled over the once turbulent woods. Exhausted but victorious, Gabby and Jake made their way back home, forever changed by their harrowing encounter. They vowed to keep the ancient diary and its secrets hidden, protecting others from the malevolent spirit's grasp. From that day forward, the tale of Gabby and Jake served as a whispered cautionary tale, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk within the shadows, waiting for the curious and the brave to awaken them. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.